Welcome to Brookdale's Visiting Writer Series. I'm Laura McCullough, and today I'll be speaking with Jericho Brown. Jericho has spent time in New Orleans. He grew up in Louisiana. He was a speechwriter for the mayor of New Orleans before he went on to earn a PhD in poetry at Houston, where he studied with poet Mark Doty. I first met Jericho at Bread Loaf, the writers' conference in New England. He's been both a waiter, which is actually a fabulously important and status-filled job, although they work hard, and he's been on staff at Bread Loaf. He's been a Cave Canem fellow, which is a very important organization in the American poetry scene that I hope that Jericho will talk to us about. His first book, Please, by New Issues Press, has recently won the American Book Award and is now, in its first year, in a third printing. He's a teacher at the University of San Diego, but he's currently the Bunting Fellow at the Radcliffe Institute at Harvard University. And Jericho was with us once before. After Katrina, we held a large reading doing a fundraiser, and he read for us then, but we are very glad to have him back, and he is on Facebook, and he wants you all to go out and be a Facebook friend with him. Hi, Jericho, welcome.
Hey, thank you so much, Laura. It's really good to be back. Thank you.
Glad to have you. Let's start with Facebook.
Okay, Facebook's cool.
Yeah, it's been good for you in terms of the book.
Yeah, it's amazing, Facebook, because you really find out that people who are not poets are indeed reading poetry. There are so many people on Facebook who have been interested in the book and who I end up having conversations with from all walks of life. People who are construction workers, people who are stay-at-home moms who love poetry. You know, and I loved finding that out. I don't think I really knew that in my heart until I got on Facebook and I had some of these conversations with some of these people.
Well, it democratizes, it makes people accessible.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like you're the poet hidden in the closet. People can reach out to you.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Please. For our audience, could you talk a little bit about the book, its inception, some of the things that you have as concerns in these poems? Yeah,
well, I'll say the inception of the book probably starts with a question I had about another love of mine. I always wondered if anything was better than poetry, and I keep thinking that maybe one thing is, and that's music. And I would go back and forth in my head, do I like poetry better than music, or do I like music better than poetry? When I lived in New Orleans.
As if they were two things.
Yeah, as if they were two, exactly. And I really wanted to write a book that put together my love of these two things, which is why much of the book concerns these old school, this old school music. You know, Janis Joplin is a speaker in some of the poems. Diana Ross, Pink Floyd, Luther Vandross, Luther Vandross, Marvin Gaye. Like there's so much of that that thing that I love going on in these poems.
And some of the poems start as a track, as if they were often old vinyl.
Exactly. And the thing I really wanted to do was not just look at my passion for music or what seemed to other people this passion for old music that I had, because this music was clearly popular way before I was born. I wanted to make use of the history that accompanied this music to say things about culture through the poems. I really like it when poems can say things.
So it's a little like when you construct a song in a studio and there's these multiple components that get laid over each other. You've done that with the poems.
I hope so. That was my goal in writing this book.
Now, I don't think I've ever asked a poet or a writer this during an interview, but would you talk about how you put your contents page together?
Oh, wow. What do you mean? Like the order of the poems?
No. Speaking about the music, you've got repeat.
Oh, yeah.
Pause. Stop.
Yeah. Well, as I said, I really wanted the metaphor for me. I always think that artists, it's really good when you're working with a metaphor, right? Like if you're a painter, think about race cars. If you're a poet, think about music. If you are a dancer, think about thinking about something that is not what you're doing and turning that into the metaphor for what you're doing helps you better understand that thing. And for me, music was always the metaphor for poetry. So when I was putting the book together, it turned out only to make sense that section 1 was repeat and section 2 was pause and section 3 was power, not just because of the content of the poems in each of those sections, but also because I kept thinking of the book as an album.
As an album, absolutely. That comes through. And then, of course, the last one is stop. Liner notes, where you have the notes that go with many of the poems in terms of historical and musical background. It's wonderfully smart.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
To kind of move on from music, but stay with that, there's such a sense of sound. Your sonic craft in the book is subtle, but it's absolutely a part of these poems. Can you talk a little bit about your process about sonics and your ear?
I think it comes from two places. Place number one has to do with me growing up in an African American church, being the biggest fan my pastor probably ever had, singing in choirs when I was growing up, having a mother who's an amazing singer. And, you know, the Black church really is a theatrical space where everything that goes on has to go on in a certain way at a certain point in a certain time. And I fell in love with
structure and ritual.
And I fell in love with the sounds of just certain phrases that I would hear over and over again, even the missteps of sounds. I really got excited about. And I think I brought that into my writing when I started writing poetry, that I wanted to kind of replicate that in my poems. You know, the thing that a preacher does when he takes a breath between that very deep and dramatic breath between phrases toward the end of a sermon. I wanted to know if there was a way I could imitate that in poems. And then the other thing, the second thing, has to do with what is just a belief that I have about poetry being, when people ask me about spoken word poetry, I'm like, what poetry is not? You know, I really believe in it as something we should hear, as something we should read aloud. When I teach, I insist that my students memorize poems and that they recite those poems in front of one another, because there's something different that happens when you have a poem in your body.
Right.
You know, I'm probably one of the biggest listeners of poetry. I want to be one of the biggest readers, but one thing I love to do is I love to, like, you know, when I walk around my house cleaning up the house, I'll have poetry playing in the background because I love to hear it. I love to have those rhythms in my daily life.
You know, I was at a concert recently, big name, and everybody was singing along with the performer, and I thought, what would happen if people at a poetry reading were that impassioned and saying the poems along with you? But that's more like the Black church than like my white upbringing would give me. Yes.
It's interesting you would say that, because I've had that experience at a poetry reading. I saw Lucille Clifton read once, and she read, and often she'll read this poem last in her readings. It's an untitled poem, but the first line is, "Won't you celebrate with me?" I don't know the entire poem. It's something like, "Won't you celebrate with me what I've built into a kind of life?" And then the last part of the poem says, "Won't you celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed." And I'll never forget being in the audience of this reading, and it was a Cave Canem reading, and so many of the people in the audience were familiar with her work. And when she got to those last few lines, everyone in the room is saying them right along with her at the same time, in the same rhythm. And it was beautiful. I'm just crying, I'm saying them too, and I'm crying, and it was such a wonderful feeling. And you're right? When that happens at concerts, you're like, wow, this is 100,000 people in this stadium together doing the same thing at the same. Exactly. And I believe that same thing can be possible for that is what poetry should do.
That is what poetry should do. Interesting. You know, one of the poems in here, "Prayer for the Backhanded," you know, I took students through in a couple of workshops, and there's a slap, prayer for the backhanded. We all know what it is to be backhanded, some of us more intimately than others. The percussive quality, the syncopation in the poem completely married the form and the content. Are you aware of making those kinds of choices?
Yes, I think the line breaks in Prayer of the Backhanded in particular came from really trying to understand the line breaks of the poet Yusef Komunyakaa.
Oh, yeah.
When I first came across his poems, I couldn't deal with it because I had no understanding for jazz. You know, like I might know something about R&B, a little bit of rock, a little bit of soul, you know, some blues, but I had no understanding for jazz. And I think the more I would listen to jazz, the more I understood his line breaks. And then came this understanding for how I wanted that particular poem, Prayer of the Backhanded, how I wanted it to work musically and how I wanted the line breaks to function.
Interesting.
In that poem. Yeah.
I have a young writer here who is in the workshop that I was just talking about, and he's a drummer. And he said he could understand the poem because he is a drummer. Yeah. That he could hear things that you were creating in terms of patterns. Yeah, is that great?
That makes me happy, yeah. Tell him I said
hi. You'll see him at dinner.
Oh, good,
You'll see him at dinner.
Makes me happy, yeah.
One of the things we love here at Brookdale is having our students spend time with our writers, and we are able to always have dinner before the readings so that you guys can talk to each other, and I know you're going to be great for our students today. Good. We're about to come to our break, so we're going to stop here, and we'll pick up afterwards. I'm Laura McCullough. This is Brookdale's Visiting Writers Series. This is Jericho Brown.
先生你好，歡迎光臨，等等先。唔該晒。Brandon.
Hello, my name is Max Weinberg, and I'm a musician, but most importantly, I'm a parent. To best understand the challenges that our children face every day, well, I'm going to ask you to go back in time and remember the challenges that you faced as a child. How did you know what the right choice was? Prevention First is a nonprofit agency in Monmouth County that offers educational programs dedicated to strengthening the foundation of our children's lives.
When you open a book, you can explore new lands, meet new friends, and discover new adventures. There are amazing possibilities when you open your mind to reading. You can log onto the Library of Congress website and let the journey begin.
Hi, welcome back to Brookdale's Visiting Writers Series. I'm Laura McCullough, having a conversation with the poet Jericho Brown. Jericho's first book, his debut, Please, by New Issues, has 3 fabulous writers blurbing him on the back, including Terrence Hayes and Claudia Rankin, but also Mark Doty. Mark had to say about Please, everyone sings in this live wire, passionate book in which the poet ventriloquizes a cast of characters hurt into music. Janis Joplin, the Scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz, Diana Ross, A Field of Crickets. What these songs hold in common is a commitment to examining how love lives beside the wound, how tenderness and harm are so close together. For these battered singers, that it's often hard to tell them apart. Fresh, deeply felt, formally adventurous, Please is a stunning debut, and that's fabulous from Mark Doty. But you talked earlier about your roots in the Black church, sonically. How has your subject matter, how has love and violence as a subject been received by your family, by other communities that you've been a part of besides the poetry world?
Well, it's interesting. I think that part of the reason I became so taken with this as a subject matter is because I really wanted to understand something that I saw in other people around me and something that I saw in myself. Prayer of the Backhanded, I think, is an interesting example of this.
Do you want to read that?
Yeah, sure.
Since
why not?
since we're talking about it, it'll give a little bit more context.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
It's gorgeous.
Prayer of the Backhanded. Not the palm, not the pear tree switch, not the broomstick, nor the closest extension cord, not his braided belt, but God, bless the back of my daddy's hand, which, holding nothing tightly against me and not wrapped in leather, eliminated the air between itself and my cheek. Make full this dimpled cheek, unworthy of its unfisted print, and forgive my forgetting the love of a hand hungry for reflex, a hand that took no thought of its target, like hail from a blind sky, involuntary, fast, but brutal in its bruising. Father, I bear the bridge of what might have been a broken nose. I lift to you what was a busted lip. Bless the boy who believes his best beatings lack intention, the mark of the beast. Bring back to life the son who glories in the sin of immediacy, calling it love. God, save the man whose arm, like an angel's invisible wing, may fly backward in fury, whether or not his son stands near. Help me hold in place my blazing jaw as I think to say, excuse me.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
And that blind sky.
Yeah,
So,
thank you.
so continue to talk about that poem.
I think it's, for me at least, what a poet must do is kind of interrogate complexity. There are these points in our lives that are gray areas, you know. And I think poetry is the only place we can really fully discuss them. We can't discuss them in politics, obviously, because people like to take sides. It's hard to discuss them in areas other than poetry because there's always a side to be taken. Poetry gives us the opportunity to say that two things can live in one person at the same time. That's what this is part of what negative capability is about, right? Like holding more than one idea in the mind at once, right? And what a poem does is it explores and interrogates that in a way that nothing else can. And I'm just really attracted to that. And so I became really attracted to the areas in our lives where violence and love do indeed live side by side. And one of those areas has to do with when we, or how we discipline our children. And I really wanted to look at that, not as a moral judgment, hit your child or don't hit your child, but an affirmation of something existing. People hit their children and love them all at the same time.
It's the paradox.
That happened, and that, yes, and that is paradoxical. And we have to answer for that being a reality, you know, as opposed to simply choosing a side.
And two, you know, especially with that poem, which evokes the sins of the fathers, victims are often then perpetrators. And yet we tend not to see the holistic vision of it. We see the specific moment, which we then may indict. But this is a very, you know, forgive my not forgetting. You know, how do we live with our wounds and transmute them?
Thank you. The other thing that goes on so much in poetry that I hope the book does is I wanted to ask questions about what could and could not be used as content or subject matter. And we talked about this a bit before this interview when we were talking about the first poem in the book. And I had been told over and over again that I could not write about family, that it was a done deal. And my thing is that if people still have families
Right,
and poetry still exists, then it's not a done deal.
And it's all fair game.
Yeah, exactly. And that doesn't mean that every time we write about something, we don't find a new way to do it. But I don't know how many subject matters there are. You know, human beings do have things in common. And we're here to discuss through our lines those things.
Now, you are one particular lens at one particular time, trying to say something as clearly as you can that no one else has said before, and all of it belongs to you. You know, to be told that some subject matter is off limits, I think is really wrong-headed.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your poetic community. Well, you're in many poetic communities, but I want to talk about Cave Canem because this is an audience that may not know that much about Cave Canem, and it's been important to you, and you've been important to them.
Yeah, well, Cave Canem is a workshop and retreat for African American poets, poets of the African diaspora. It was founded in the mid-90s by Toy Derricott and Cornelius Eady, two of my favorite poems. And it's a safe haven. It's a space where we have workshops, and we have readings, and we...
You have a First Book Award.
We have a very important first book award that's been won by some of my favorite poets. Tracy K. Smith is, I think, an amazing poet.
She's
somebody
been here,
who's won that award. But yeah, the Cave Canem ends up being a kind of support for Black poets, and also a kind of opportunity.
Does Cave Canem have a Facebook page?
Cave Canem does have a Facebook
it up.
page, and people, you know, there's a fan page for Cave Canem, and you can become a fan of Cave Canem and find out about these events and different things that they're doing. And there's just a lot of community work that the thing I want to say is, other than the summer workshop,
which offers a free, you can, students who don't necessarily have a lot of money can apply, and there is scholarship money for that.
There is scholarship money, but Cave Canem also has workshops throughout the nation, throughout the year, that different people hold at different parts of the country.
Oh, I didn't know.
And so there's this community component to Cave Canem, which a lot of people don't know about.
I didn't know that.
But people are taking these workshops all over the place. Not to mention having what they call legacy conversations. I think the next one is...
What's a legacy conversation?
A legacy conversation is where a younger poet has an open conversation, much like the one we're having now with an older poet. The next one is with Ntozake Shange, who wrote for colored girls who commit suicide when the rainbow isn't enough. I think they've had one with Yusef Komayaka.
And who would be the younger poet? What a fabulous idea.
I don't remember who is having the conversation with her. I know that when it was done with Amiri Baraka, a poet who I love named Tracy Morris did it, and with Yusef Komayaka, Terrence Hayes did it. And I think it's a wonderful idea because it kind of bridges the gap that might exist between generations.
Now, Cave Canem is Latin, so if anybody's going to Google it, they need to know it's spelled Cavecanem, right?
Yes,
and it's of the dog or something like that?
Yeah, okay. Beware the dog.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm glad we talked about that. Let's talk a little bit about what you're working on now. You're teaching, you have this fellowship.
Oh, yeah.
What kind of new work? Who are you reading?
Wow, it's, who am I reading? What am I not reading? I've kind of put myself in a bit of a daunting position here. Part of what I'm trying to do is, I'm changing the metaphor a bit. The first metaphor was music, and a particular kind of music, like, that I felt like people really could groove to. Like, oh, this is something I remember people grooving to when I was growing up. And I'm thinking about, and what got me thinking about it was the election, that kind of nasty battle that Clinton and Obama had with one another, and how that battle was brought to us via television news. And so I'm thinking about television news as the metaphor for my poems now, and I'm looking at the life and work of two people in particular. One of them is Jessica Savage, who was one of the first women to anchor at a major news station. She was the first woman anchor at NBC, and Max Robinson, who was the first African American anchor for any network. He was at ABC in the late 70s and early 80s. And other than looking at their lives, I'm also...
And they're kind of being analogs for Clinton and Obama.
Exactly. Yeah,
Interesting.
because they would have, there's a way in which what the networks began to do in the late 70s and early 80s is they realized, oh, you put these people on TV and folk get excited. Like, people are talking about these anchors almost as much as they're talking about the news that these anchors are reporting.
Like the celebrity status that really started to happen.
Exactly.
Was there a competition and animosity, anything like that?
I don't think there was.
I
I don't think there was an open competition, but I think there's always a competition with networks to see who's going to be the first to do something or who's going to be the next to do something.
So women in black.
Yeah.
You're going to
who's going to attack
this out for
who's
us.
going to attack the margins first? And yeah, exactly. And
what's this doing for you? What I think I'm hearing you say is you find a metaphor through which you're going to try to break to some discovery for yourself.
Yeah.
What's that meaning to you? What are the stakes for you in this?
Well, again, it's a matter of complexity, right? That you can be that you can participate in imperialism the way we participate in imperialism, that you can participate in capitalism the way we participate.
Buy the book, though. Stay with me, sorry.
That we can do this, and that we can end up, people who are from the margins end up fighting each other. It's like, who's going to be first at bat or something. It's this weird thing that happens. When in actuality, I feel like somebody's lied to us. Like, we have more in common. We have, but like, if we really look at the issues, at the things we want, like, I was talking about this with somebody. I hate to, like, maybe I shouldn't bring this up here, but I was talking about this with somebody. There's a way in which the people from the church and feminists don't always get along.
Oh,
but they agree about pornography.
They agree about a lot of things.
Exactly.
This could be an entire area of discussion for us for a whole nother interview.
I know.
But we are going to have to bring it to a close.
I talk too much, right?
But what I hope is this makes people want to go out and read your work.
Yeah,
Clearly, you are thoughtful and interrogating a lot of important issues for us. Jericho Brown, poet extraordinaire, a good person. My name's Laura McCullough. This is Brookdale's Visiting Writer Series. Please tune in again.